Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Morin. I am the head of marketing here at SmartAction and happy to welcome you to today's webinar. Today, we are talking about the 5 best practices to AI self-service and doing it without compromise, which is key. Conversational AI has, for the most part, really just changed the landscape on what can be automated over voice or chat. However, many organizations still have an over-reliance on live agents. For a lot, they don't necessarily know where to start. Some of it looks scary. Other pieces of it look risky. And SmartAction has helped more than 100 organizations make the transition to conversational AI automation. Nearly a dozen of those implementations in the Fortune 500. So we're here today to talk about our most important insights, at least of what we've learned along the way. So with that said, this webinar is not about SmartAction technology or services, but rather it's about the best practices, the key insights that we've uncovered that are critical to building out self-service that actually works. So with me today is Tom Lewis. For 13 years, he was a partner at Deloitte Consulting, where he ran their customer service advisory practice. And Tom, there you're advising Fortune 500 clients on, I guess you name it, everything contact center and customer service related, strategy, technology, operations, customer experience, you name it. Tom's currently the CEO at SmartAction. So Tom, good to have you with us today.
Thanks a bunch, Brian.
So we are slated for 30 minutes, but as you do have questions, we ask that you just type your questions into the Q&A box or into the chat box, and we will answer as we go along, and then we will move to a full Q&A at the bottom of the hour. So what I will show you is just at least who's talking. You might be interested to know, do we have any street cred on the subject, at least before we jump into it. Now, I'm not a big fan of long company overview slides, so I'll keep this super short. SmartAction started as an AI research company back in 2002, so I guess you could say we're not the new kids on the block when it comes to AI development, machine learning, natural language processing. We've been doing this a long time and have been pushing this front within customer service. And so where we fit is with companies who are already using a contact center platform, or IVR might be a Genesys, Avaya, a Five9, a NICE inContact, so on, and they lean on us to expand self-service automation in those environments, essentially automating the conversations that are being handled by live agents. So you can see our awards and recognition on screen. Don't need to go on that, but a good call out is like Gartner Peer Insights, where we happen to be the top-rated virtual customer assistant solution as voted by peers. So anyhow, with that said, let's just jump right into the topic. We're looking at best practice number 1, and it's this idea that virtual agents need the perfect fit. And Tom, one of the most important things about conversational AI is understanding where it can benefit an organization and where it should coexist alongside live agents. You talk here about finding the perfect fit, and I think from the audience question is, well, how hard is it to find that?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So for most organization, I think it's just understanding where to start. Almost every organization has 2 to 3 call types that are perfect candidates right out of the gate for natural language automation, and that will deliver a great CX and near immediate ROI, so customer experience and return on investment, and then grow from there. But it can be hard if you're trying to do a big bang implementation, automate practically everything right from the start. It's not to say that we don't do big bang implementations with companies right out of the gate. In fact, we do. We're doing one right now with one of the largest hotel chains in the country, and that includes 13 different call types that are going into production at the same time. The point is that we tailor the approach to the client and prioritize the fit based on the client. And so we have customers where we started with 1 call type, but now are handling up to 25 different call types. And so for this reason, we have an entire layer of solution consultants that do nothing except help organizations build a business case and a roadmap for conversational AI to help figure all of this stuff out.
So, Tom, considering that that's really the starting ground, and for those who have never done this, maybe you talk just a little bit to, what does that involve, and can they do it on their own?
Well, I can at least explain how we do it. What we do is what we call a call study. It's an analysis into the top call drivers coming into the contact center, which includes assessing each one for its fit with conversational AI. We literally sit with live agents, supervisors, they review reports, and talk with the business. What we're looking for is the perfect marriage where automation is basically a no-brainer. How you get there is by knowing what can be automated, projecting automation success rates, and mapping that volume and the costs. And not just the cost to build, but the cost to manage, maintain, and upgrade. And what we're looking for is a self-funding business case that just becomes obvious and easy to adopt for everyone.
Okay, Tom, so let's just dig a little deeper on that point. In this assessment portion, maybe you can explain just some of the types of things you're looking for.
So I think in order to find the right fit, we're looking for, where does natural language, both the recognition and the cognition piece fit in? What kind of data are we talking about? From a prediction standpoint, can we incorporate that into the conversation flow? And how effective would the omni-channel parts of those call types be?
Okay, so then after having an idea of what conversational AI is capable of and maybe understanding how that might benefit an organization where there's a need, let's get back to the call study piece, because I know that you are looking to put call drivers into different buckets. This slide starts with simple. What do those look like?
So these are the ones that follow the same repetitive, linear or near linear process. Humans almost feel like robots doing the job. And so one of the questions we ask is, who or what is handling those simple call types?
Well, so if someone is handling a portion of their simple call types, let's say through a touch-tone IVR or directed dialogue, what should they be thinking?
So if it's a touch tone or directed dialogue, we ask, are you and your customer happy with that experience? Or would it be improved with natural language capabilities? Moreover, could you contain more or get the job done quicker with natural language? And oftentimes, live agents are handling simple call types that are very process driven because touch tone just won't work or just isn't a good experience. So for example, the second largest insurer in the country has auto body shops that call in to get approval on claims that are filed. And there are 17 or so back and forth turns in this conversation, and involves capturing lots of different things, including long alphanumeric policy numbers as fast as they can say them, among other things in this call. And that's hard for a human to do right the first time, and frankly impossible to really do via typical IVR. And that's just one example of a process-driven call type that could not be automated until the advent of these conversational AI platforms.
Okay, so then Tom, beyond the simple call types, I mean, you're kind of bleeding over into that a little bit already with that example. There's the complex call types, and really up to this point, a lot of contact center leaders have ignored them because they're too difficult to automate, thinking it would create a poor CX, or just too many different exceptions that could occur within the call that need live agent assistance. But that isn't necessarily the case anymore, is it?
Well, it's in these complex call types where the power of conversational AI can really excel. And what we're looking for is the percentage of calls that follow the same repetitive process. In other words, although exceptions could occur, and that you're going to need a live agent for critical thinking, judgment, or whatever, is there a happy path that a large number of callers take that is process-driven, even if it's complex? And that's the swim lane for the virtual agent. So as an example, Office Depot, they wanted to automate order returns, but returns can be complex. And so we helped them find a path that was very process-driven. As it turns out, most customers want a refund instead of an exchange. So as long as the customer chooses that path, then they stay in automation with the virtual agent, and everything else gets transferred to a live agent. And so for Office Depot, that meant deflecting a very large number of calls that live agents would otherwise have to handle.
Okay, so then beyond just simple and complex call types, outside of that, what are, I guess, really other considerations that contact center leaders should think about when it comes to improving efficiency, with conversational AI?
Well, first, should you greet the caller with natural language? If your IVR touch tone menu is working, then maybe you should keep it and just use a virtual agent to automate some of the call types as we already discussed. So in other words, instead of transferring to a live agent, you're just transferring the call to a virtual agent. However, if the experience would be better with a natural language greeting on the upfront part or help you contain more, then we would consider virtual agent for the front door and routing instead of your current IVR. And so here's an example. A national online retailer uses virtual agents to greet customers with a very open-ended question: how can I help you today? Like a lot of other customers, the virtual agent is listening for a number of intents that keep the customer in automation. Anything outside of that is transferred to the appropriate live agent based on what we heard.
Okay, Tom. Now, I know when it comes to outbound, there certainly is a lot that can be done here with conversational AI, that is otherwise, limited if you're trying to use a robo-dialer.
Yeah, right. And that's because you can't do anything transactional with a robocall. Same with most text alerts. There's no intelligence to interact with. So live agents are too expensive for outbound calls. Robocalls are too limited, and this is where we see a lot of organizations deploying self-service, particularly in confirmations, collections, and scheduling. Penske Truck Rental used to use robo-dialers and text messages to remind people of upcoming truck rentals. But if the customer needed to cancel or change it, it then have to hang up and call into the contact center, wait on queue, and take care of the transaction. But instead, by using an AI-powered virtual agent for this outbound confirmations, they can handle the cancellation or reschedule right there on the spot and deflect the call from ever even coming into the call center.
Yeah, so good example. And I do want to go ahead and encourage and remind the audience, as if you do have questions, get them into our Q&A box or chat, and we will answer as we go along, or once we get to the full Q&A session at the bottom of the hour. Now, on the screen in front of you is our second best practice. It's this idea that virtual agents need guardrails. There is a fine line between what should be automated by conversational AI and then understanding what should be transferred to a live agent. So Tom, we've seen this, many voice and chat automation projects fail simply to someone misunderstanding where that line is and where that line should be.
Yeah, when we talk about creating guardrails for virtual agents, what we're really talking about is the handling rules. What should be handled by the virtual agent, where we know the CX will be fantastic, and when should a call be transferred to a live agent? If the virtual agent has access to the customer data, you can use your unique knowledge of the business to really establish handling rules at any point in the conversation flow. So, for example, the largest pizza chain automated rapid reorders. This meant callers were reordering what they did last time. They meet several pieces of criteria. For example, a previous order can be duplicated, assuming that certain criteria are true, such as having the right inventory and the ability to deliver in less than 90 minutes. Another example, in the medical equipment field, orders covered by Medicare have a very complex process, and virtual agents aren't handling all of them. But if the ship date is within the next 30 days, or the call, of when the call is, or if a recurring order is going to be shipped in the next 7 days, those business rules can be handled by a virtual agent perfectly. So, and maybe I'll do one more example around the AAA clubs. They're using virtual agents for emergency roadside assistance calls. And after authentication, the virtual agent will capture intent using, a natural language, how can I help you today? And the virtual agent is listening for one of 7 intents it can help members with. Now, it wasn't 7 to start with, but it's up to 7 now. And things like if you have a flat tire, you're out of gas, dead battery, need a tow, and if the member says something outside the intents that we know how to handle, like being locked out of a vehicle, or even worse, a baby being locked in the vehicle, then the virtual agent will quickly transfer to a live agent along with all the information that it's captured and the reason for the call. This transfer is an example of what happens when you go outside the happy path. AAA identified 7 processes that were perfect for virtual agents. Everything else remains with humans for now.
Okay, Tom, that leads us to our best practice number 3, that virtual agents need data. And when you say that a virtual agent needs data. Maybe you can explain just a little bit, what are you getting at here?
Well, to be clear, the focus in this best practice is access to customer data. Live agents require access to customer data for the purposes of reading and recording data to support those linear processes. It's no different with an AI-powered virtual agent, except there's a little more to it. And so first, it's used for the purpose of these guardrails I was talking about before. And beyond that, it's for the purpose of personalization. And so in this day and age, people expect the machine or the bot should be more intuitive. It should know something about you, which also streamlines authentication. So one of the best uses of customer data is for this predictive capability. And this is the cutting edge where AI service is going to reduce friction to complete calls. And so the best situation is when a company has enough data on their own customer that they can predict why the customer is calling. So an example in this of this is in the healthcare space, specifically around EOBs. So that's explanations of benefits. And customers often have questions about these things because they are confusing. And if the virtual agent matches the caller ID and has done all the HIPAA authentication and then sees that the EOB recently went out to him or her, it can offer a predictive greeting such as, "Hi, Bob, are you calling about the recent explanation of benefits we sent or something else?" And the customer realizes at that point that we have the right data, and it's much more likely that they're going to engage with the system.
So this leads us to best practice number 4. Cami asked this question, hey, is this webinar, is it exclusively about phone calls? And is AI used for chat sessions or other self-service functions? So that was timely. You can see in front of you here, the days of using simple IVR for self-service for voice, and then you're using chat bots, for chat, those days are gone. You do have to think about how to create a consistent and seamless experience across channels. So Tom, I know we're speaking a little bit in voice coming up to this point, but really we're talking about an omni-channel self-service strategy, even though it may start in voice. Can you tell me a little bit more about where this is heading?
Yep, it's the headache of managing and training disparate technologies independent of each other that have different capabilities, different integration, different customer experience, and maybe even different vendors to manage. And these applications fork further and further away from each other over time. And often data isn't shared, reporting isn't consistent, there's no unified management. I can say more, but the use case, we'll maybe highlight this. So Textile Fashion Group, and they've got some brands that you may have heard of like Fabletics, Shoe Dazzle, Just Fab. They saw the shift happening when they examined their customer preferences in the landscape of conversational AI technology that was available to them at the time. And they deployed an AI-powered virtual agent, first in voice, that deflected a ton of the repetitive calls related to order management, and then they scaled the solution to chat to provide this sort of cross-platform, consistent CX to their members.
So we're moving into the very last best practice here, and this is, Tom, one of the biggest insights that we can share. The idea that virtual agents need a team of CX experts. There's a lot of discussion that goes into the technology around conversational AI. Ironically, very little actually goes into the CX team. That's required to build it and run it. Tom, you got a ton of experience here. And what can you highlight for us in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology can be fantastic, but if you don't design and implement it correctly, you may not get out the other end what you think. And so let me skim through some of these sort of building blocks quickly. The CX consultant and the solutions experts are the ones that do this call study I talked about, and they get the scope and the approach right. Project manager is the day-to-day resource person that makes sure that things go live on time and the right performance expectations, so forth. Now, the CX designer is one of the most important roles. And so they're not simply a conversational flow designer, and it's not as intuitive as people think. They're behavioral scientists and your biggest customer advocate to ensure that the conversation flow are effortless and effective with the right guardrails and handling rules. So for lack of better words, they help manipulate the conversation flow to lead the customer down the best path. And it all seems very logical and common sense, but our experience has shown that in some ways it's neither of those things. It's somewhat of an art, and a science. And just as an anecdote, I had a discussion with our project managers recently, and I asked how often the CX team recommended something, and the client pushed back hard and suggested something else, which we implemented, and then asked, okay, so but within a month, let's say, of going live, had the client come back and agree with our original recommendation and ask us to change it back that way? And they said, yeah, that happens about 98% of the time. And that's only because we have a very experienced team, maybe too accommodating, but that intimately understood the human-centric aspects within the conversational AI. And the CX design is perhaps the most important thing, as a technology alone is not going to make the great experience. So, this is what we're going to maybe show you an example here. So it's from a national travel agency who wanted to use our technology to qualify potential customers. And they were looking for people who were actually going to book a room. That's the key point. So they played a heavy hand in the CX design for the conversation flow. You can see the results on the screen. We're going to give it a try here to see if we can play the before picture. So Brian, maybe go ahead and give that a shot.
New reservation, or change, cancel, or confirm an existing reservation. Which would you like to do?
Book a new reservation.
Great. Let's get started. How many rooms would you like to reserve?
1.
How many adults over the age of 17?
Okay, so you get this sense, pretty, like we were talking about, a linear process. Then we had our CX designers sort of re-architect it, and let's listen to the first part of that one.
Are you interested in making a new hotel reservation?
Yes.
Great. I'll need to ask a few questions before I transfer you to a specialist who will find you our best possible rates. First, please say or enter the number of rooms you'd like to reserve.
1.
Got it. Where will you be traveling to?
Valdosta, Georgia.
Did you say Valdosta, Georgia?
All right, so there's different flow entirely, but what's more important out of all of that is that the results were that the customer actually experienced 150% improvement on their bookings based on the conversation and the way that whole thing was managed. So let's continue on with sort of the components here. And the Customer Insight Manager is a group dedicated to ongoing monitoring and improvement of the application, and which means they're poring over the data and examining containment rates against outcomes and a lot more. These are guys and gals that make sure that the system is always performing at top level for the life of the relationship. And then finally, the Success Manager ultimately drives the omni-channel vision of your organization. So they take those first roadmaps and really help chart out the journey. We often refer to this as a journey, not a destination. And so they're the ones responsible for making sure that the ROI is achieved and identify what should be tackled next. And as you can see, there's a lot of players required to orchestrate the whole CX experience.
So if you're listening and you may be wondering, why is it that we know so much about this? And I will give just a very quick, and I mean very quick, just 90-second plug as to why you might consider a smart action for conversational AI. When we developed our AI, in particular the advanced speech recognition, all the back end, AI cognition to extract intent, we found out very quickly that it wasn't just about having the very best AI. It wasn't just about having the best AI engineers. What you needed was you also needed the very best CX professionals across different disciplines to deliver the CX services along with the technology. So one thing that we do that's a little different is that we provide it all as a bundle. The technology, the CX services, it's all delivered as a subscription service, which is a different model. So we have the saying that you can see it on screen, we call it life less hard, because everything we do is with an obsession on how can we make life less hard for clients who are making the transition automation, that how do we make life less hard for their customers to self-serve so the technology is transparent and it's near frictionless. So that really has been the driver behind, our business model, where we come in more as a partner, with the technology and services instead of just a technology provider by itself, just trying to sell software licenses. So if you do want to know more, probably the best way to check us out is just by reading things from our own customers. They are our best advocates. You can go to Gartner Peer Insights and look up virtual customer assistants. In fact, the last time I checked, IBM Watson has a couple more reviews than we do for the top spot, but you might be interested in how we stack up with ratings. So I'd encourage you to check us out. And in closing here, before we move to Q&A, I'll just mention, if you are interested in next steps, we've found that most start by engaging us one of two ways. One is with a demo, just so you can hear call types that are specific to your industry, and you can hear about what we're doing for other companies that look like you, and understand some of the results that we're driving there. Or separately, it's what we call free AI readiness assessment. You'll say, what's that? Well, it's not that difficult. It's actually just sitting down with you, a very consultative approach to take a look at your call types and chats in your contact center, look at those volumes, find the perfect candidates for AI automation, and then assist in building out a business case and an ROI model if we see something there that is what we would call a no-brainer. So if you want to engage, just email us, info@smartaction.com, and we're happy to take that to the next level. Now, we will move to Q&A at this time, so if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A box or the chat box. We have had some that have come in. If you do have to run, we will let you know that we will be sending a follow-up email that does have the access to the deck. We also have an associated ebook, which we'll hand over to you. And then once the webinar has been rendered, probably sometime tomorrow, we'll have someone on the team send that out to you, so that way you can re-listen or you can share this webinar with stakeholders prior to moving to an engagement if that's what you need. So with that said, we'll go ahead and move over to Q&A and answer everything that has come in. Tom, there's several here that are related to integration. Someone is using an Avaya, someone is using an i5-9, and just wondering, how are we integrating with their existing, I guess really think about two things: contact center platforms, and then also existing technologies, CRM, ERP, you name it.
Yeah, and those are the two main buckets that we generally get engaged to discussing. And the good news is it's not a particularly high bar in either case. So let's talk about the telephony first. In our world, any telephony platform will work. We're telephony agnostic, whether you have an on-prem solution or a cloud-based solution. And we can walk through more of the details of how we do that. But and then, for several of them, we are further certified to work in those environments as well. So that's a pretty low impact item, believe it or not. In fact, most organizations, the effort on their side to integrate us is a day or two. On the data side, our head of engineering likes to say hasn't met an integration that we don't like, and then that's because we built so many of them, and frankly, we built the system and the approach based on the assumption that everybody was going to come to us with some level of difference in the back-end system. So whether it's Sterling Commerce or Siebel or Salesforce or Oracle or what have you, those are ones that we've worked with before. As well, it should probably be stated that if you've got the capability that we're, the call type, the thing that we're talking about enabled on your website already, then that integration probably already exists, and we just use the same web services, just presented in a either in the chat environment or in the voice environment.
Thanks, Tom. Bruce, got your note. Appreciate the comment. Tom, a question here. Have you worked with New Voice Media?
Not yet.
Okay. A question here relating to rollout, Tom. How long does a typical rollout take?
So the standard consultant's answer probably applies here, which is it depends. Our typical implementation life cycle is about 2 months. We had a client who had somewhat of an emergency about a month ago where the government changed the policies around Cuba and cruise line bookings needed to be handled. And so we actually launched an app for them all within 24 hours. And so that was a little bit extraordinary. But the reason that's all possible is because so many of the building blocks of the technology are sort of, well oiled and well completed, that stitching them together to put the veneer of the particular client together doesn't take that much time. I know one of the last points we made was around the CX design and how important that is, but on the technology side, our differentiated technology is what allows us to make that implementation lifecycle super fast. And we also, back to those CIMs, those customer insight management functions, they run the process of changing and upgrading the application. So let's say the client says, well, it's blue, and then tomorrow they say, well, no, we need to change it to red. Well, that change occurs, and we don't have to bring the system down. Call finishes as it would in the old system, the blue, and as soon as the red is implemented, then the next calls just sort of go there. So we don't have maintenance windows or anything like that. That's sort of the beauty of the way it's been architected and up in the cloud makes it very light touch for our clients.
So Tom, good question here is we're already doing some self-service automation with our IVR. Does this mean that if we used your service that we would lose the automation that we're already doing?
Depends. If you're happy with it and it's doing what you want and it's economical, you might want to keep it, at least for the time being, and focus on the areas that you really have the agents working on now that's not adding a lot of value. And typically what our clients on this journey find out is they implement the first thing with us, and then they realize not only how we do business, how customers are responding to it and so forth, and then they have a much more informed posture to make the decision, well, do we replace some of the other stuff that we've got? And I often advise contact center managers to think of all the technology and all the resources as a toolbox, and you pick the right tool for the right job. And so as time evolves, the tools evolve and you can make that decision. We don't have sharp elbows when it comes to working in an environment that's got lots of different telephony and so forth. The advantage, of course, of what we're after, however, is that you end up with one vendor that can handle voice and digital channels, and you got one set of integrations, one set of business rules, and so ultimately, I would think it would make sense, but there's no hard and fast rule that says we have to do it that way.
So, Tom, a question here, and this is related to post-production. After you do stand up an application and self-service automation is in place. Once you're at that point or at that position, the idea is, or the question is, how hard is it then to get updates or changes to the system once it is in place? And really, that is one of the things, Tom, is different about conversational AI. It is a very iterative process. So maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, and I think the cruise line example I gave a moment ago is probably a good example of that, as well as sort of the fact that we don't have the maintenance windows. But the other part of this is that one thing I can say is that our clients are come to us with these changes. We run through a process, but in many cases, if it's just a small scripting change or something along those lines, those things can happen the same day. It's more significant than that. It can depend. But the beauty is that what we're after is defining the best process rule. And I probably should mention this, that anything that we do inside the system should be the same rules that the call center agent is doing. And so sometimes what we find out in this whole process is the way the agents are doing it is inconsistent, and so that we need to make a consistency between both the agent and automation. But the bottom line is it's not a high hurdle to make these changes, again, because of the platform, because of the no maintenance windows, because all the things that we've been talking about.
So Tom, questions here related to customer satisfaction of virtual agents versus live agents. I mean, this is obviously one that you do get commonly. Those stepping into it want to make sure that they're doing this without compromising CX. What do some of your customers see and experience in this area?
Yeah, and many customers run their own customer satisfaction surveys and programs, NPS, et cetera. And the bottom line is that what customers tell us is that in those cases where the system handled the call entirely, their customer satisfaction scores are higher than when their agents handled the call entirely or the contact entirely. And there's a variety of reasons why that probably is. First of all, it's highly calibrated and done in a effortless way. But also, customers don't always want to talk to a live agent. And so if they can get the job done efficiently through automation, they're happy to do that. Now, the other side of the coin is that when we partially answer a question, and that could be because it was designed to only handle the first part, or because the customer needed to sort of eject out and get to a live agent, the results sort of mixed. But what we found is that a lot of that mix depends on how the live agent handled the transfer from automation. If they force the customer to go through the same authentication and ask the same questions again, highly annoyed customer. If they handle it seamlessly, like, I see that you did X and now let's pick up and do Y, then those ratings are also better when automation streamlined the first part of those calls.
And in fact, listeners can go to our website and listen to the recent webinar we just did with Purchasing Power, an $8 billion e-commerce company, and they saw their NPS scores increase by 25% after they implemented. So again, it's just about choosing what you're implementing, making sure you have the guardrails in place where that experience is as good or better than a live agent. And Tom, just one more question here. It's related to call volumes. It's what types of call volumes should we be experiencing before deciding if it's a good candidate for automation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because if you're in a center that's got 2-minute average handle time, that's entirely different than somebody who's got a 15-minute call, which is interesting. We've actually got a couple of customers that are in the 7, 10, 15-minute range. But one way to think about it is, typically a call center or call volume that has roughly 30 to 40 agents handling that volume is the floor. And so it's a pretty low floor. And then from the upper end, obviously, given that it's automation and in the cloud and what have you, there's really not an upper end to it. So that should give some high level guide around where the ROI will make sense. And it's a pretty low floor.
So once again, I do want to just give my appreciation to the audience who've taken their time to join in. Regarding next steps, the best place to start is just dropping a simple email to us at info@smartaction.com, and we can begin an engagement on however you would prefer on your end. And on our end, we will be sending you the copy of this deck and then following up again with the on-demand webinar, so you have that on hand. Of course, if you have any questions that did not get answered, just reply to one of those emails and we can engage you then. So Tom, any other closing remarks on your end before we sign off?
No, thank you, Brian. Enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you, Tom. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.